The Academy for Jewish Religion plays a critically important role in the American religious landscape, because not only do they train leaders for the Jewish community, they train leaders who embody and live into precisely the kind of pluralism which we need now more than perhaps any time in any of our lives.
AJR exposes its students to a variety of perspectives. This prepares them better to interact with the diverse Jews of their future communities. In addition, rabbis and cantors study with each other at AJR and learn the professional challenges of each other so that they interact as clergy in the synagogue in a much smoother way.
The value of AJR is so clear because in our very partisan time, having people come together to be trained as rabbis who come from different denominational backgrounds, different ideological perspectives, and to learn together is really the wave of the future.
Shalom, my name is Rabbi Rebecca Serbiu, and as the director of Rabbis Without Borders at Kalal, I had the wonderful opportunity to work with many AJR students and rabbis, and I was incredibly impressed with their deep commitment to bring pluralism and spirituality and be willing to serve every aspect of the Jewish community.
Pioneers in offering pluralistic education and flexible part-time options for those called to these roles, AJR has been a shining light as we all strive to train inspired leaders who have the passion, learning, and commitment to meet the varied needs of the Jewish community.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the second webinar in our three-part series, Conversations about Climate Change and Judaism, presented by the Center for Judaism and Science of the Academy for Jewish Religion, a pluralistic Jewish seminary ordaining rabbis and cantors for North America and beyond, and by Americans for Ben-Gurion University. This series is made possible by a grant from the Dialogue in Science, Ethics, and Religion program of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. My name is Matthew Goldstone, and I'm the Assistant Academic Dean at AJR. And this week, we will be discussing the rise of disaster-level climate events with Dr. Avner Gross and Rabbi Tziona Zelazo. Our presenters will take a few minutes to introduce themselves and speak about their work, and then we'll engage in a conversation about our topic. We hope to finish the conversation in about an hour, and because of the limited time, we might not be able to get to questions, but if you have questions, I encourage you to put them in the Q&A field so that our presenters can know more about what you're interested in. So I'll ask our presenters to just briefly introduce themselves now and speak a little bit about their work. Rabbi Zelazo, would you like to begin?
Yes, hello. I will tell you about myself, that I was born and raised in Israel. And as you probably know, Israelis are forced to develop strategies for survival, and it fits right at my work. I served in the IDF as an intelligence sergeant. I studied biblical archaeology in Tel Aviv University and anthropology in UWM. So before my ordination, I was an adjunct professor of anthropology for 14 years. And then I became a rabbi and an interfaith hospital chaplain. In 2018, I was first introduced to the American Red Cross in a conference where I was asked to join the chaplain team because of the increased number of natural disasters that start occurring. Being exposed to suffering at the hospital, I thought it would be just another similar experience of chaplaincy. But I learned very quickly that working in a disaster site is very different than a hospital setting. After my first deployment in Kentucky in 2001, I got the bug and I became really motivated to continue my work. I decided that I want to dedicate a chunk of my life to providing support to those who lost everything as a result of a disaster. I learned a lot about myself since then, and I must acknowledge the fact that life out there is not an easy place for many people who live there. Now I am a volunteer spiritual care provider for the Red Cross, and with adding to my duties is being a regional lead in New Jersey and a supervisor. So now, before I begin talking a little bit about my work, I will include some visuals as background while I talk. So as you listen to me, you will have some kind of visual idea what a disaster looks like. So I really became passionate about helping people who were affected by disaster. And as such, when I came to the scene of disaster, I always met those who fight for survival. And when I say survival, it's people that lost everything, their homes, their medicine, their loved ones, and then the survival flight continue as they need to recover and finding another place to start their life all over again. The most important thing is that I want to say for this webinar is that I witnessed firsthand the devastation impact of climate change that became a real problem because they become more frequent, all the tornadoes and hurricanes become more frequent. And I saw the heavy price that humans pay now for that crisis today. Of course, we know that disasters are not new. As we're familiar from example from the Bible, from Noah's flood, and the earthquake in Sodom and Gomorrah. But today, we must see what we can learn from these frequent disasters and take it forth. After a disaster, the American Red Cross provide shelters and comfort centers for sleeping arrangement, hot meals, snacks, water, showers, laundry, health services, mental health services, and spiritual care services to the victims. So as me being a spiritual care provider, I provide pastoral care, emotional and spiritual support to those who were directly affected by a disaster. If I get deployed right after a disaster hits, I am in the field of distraction where I stand with people outdoors and trying to comfort them as they stand there in front of their destroyed home and with the disbelief. If I get deployed a little bit after a disaster, I am placed in shelters and comfort care centers, and I'm counseling people and providing for them a shoulder and a listening ear. I also roll up my sleeves sometimes where I need to help people eat, clean their spaces, serve them water, and do whatever is needed to help them. I learned a lot of things from my work on these situations. And the first thing is that I learned that when people are in crisis, they feel helpless. And many times they cannot think straight. I need to get them a strategy to how to hold their center, and hopefully my presence can help them find their inner strength and faith to navigate through the trauma. I cannot restore their home, or I cannot change the crisis for them, but I can be there for them by allowing them to share their concern, their hopes, and makes them feel that they are not alone. And for many, I also affirm their spirituality, their theological perspective or philosophy. The second things I learned is that the more religious people were, the less likely they were concerned about climate change. When people are in crisis, They do not care why the disaster happened or what climate change is. People who are religious could bring God into the picture, either feeling they are punished by God and feel guilty about it, or this could be just the God will and God will provide that makes them more accepting of the situation. Because of my background in anthropology, interfaith chaplaincy, and understanding pluralism, I have to be non-judgmental and sit with everyone, no matter their faith, perspective, or philosophy. All I can offer is compassionate presence and respecting their diverse beliefs while connecting them to the appropriate resources to recovery. And the third thing I learned that it's really difficult to calculate the sort of toll and even harder to quantify women misery. Therefore, I need to also focus on survival accounts. I am there to hear their stories, and the stories that they share are the most precious stories that you will hear. And you can see from the visuals that some photos talk about us talking to clients. They are so eager to share their story, and we listen. So as we know in chaplaincy that the first step to recovery and healing for client is talking about it. So sometimes they cry and we don't have to pray, but sometimes that's what they want. And then I can tell them, let us look at the disaster as an aspiration. You no longer have to be a victim. You can be a hero. So now as a Jewish woman, not only a rabbi, I'm just a Jewish woman, I think that humans have the responsibility to care and protect creation. As we read in the Torah, that God gave Adam the land to till and work it well. And we also are familiar with the Talmudic concept of Bal Tashchit, the prohibition to destroy trees and other important things in our environment. So this raises a lot of questions and challenges for me. And one question will not be, why did this happen? Why did the disaster happen? Because Judaism is asking us to ask, what shall we do when it happens? I think that the action of doing good with loving kindness weighs far more than understanding the reasons for disaster. We are commanded to help the afflicted, comfort the bereaved, send healing to the injured, and aid those who have lost their livelihood and homes. I wish I could be like Abraham, who negotiated with God for Sodom and Gomorrah to reduce the decree, or being like Moses, who pleaded with God about being softer with the Israelites. But as my desire to help people never leaves me, perhaps it's okay if I feel like Moses, who asked God to heal his sister Miriam when she was afflicted with leprosy. I am doing my part with hope to heal people in our environment. No matter how difficult it could be working in conditions that are not exactly ideal, when I return home after a deployment, I feel that I made a difference.
Thank you, Rabbi Zalazo. Dr. Gross, if you want to just share a little bit about yourself and your work before we turn to the conversation. And you need to unmute. I know you have a second device because the microphone on your computer isn't working. So if you can unmute that device.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Hi, everyone, and thank you for inviting me for this interesting discussion. So I am the principal investigator of the Climate Change Research Lab in Ben-Gurion University. since 2019. And in our lab, we study how climate change affects forests and oceans, and how extreme weather events, similar to one that Fiona mentioned, impact plants, forests, and photosynthesis and other parts of our natural environment. So actually, in our lab, we have kind of huge incubators when we can actually imitate the conditions of the future. We can change the atmospheric conditions, the moisture, the temperature, the carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere, and then we can grow plants or incubate ocean water or algae in the ocean and see how they react to these future conditions which we suppose to see in the next 20, 30, 40, 100, and 200 years. And we also try to go back in time to times 20,000 years ago and even 50 million years ago, where the climate was kind of an analog to what we will have maybe in the future. So it's something we can look at the past to understand the future through the present. So we're doing experiments in the lab or in the field. We travel to places like the Amazon forest or Galapagos Island or Iceland or Finland, to many unique ecosystems which can help us fight climate change through the trees, through the waters of the oceans, which can absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, or to find new technologies which can help us reduce the concentration of the greenhouse gases. And we founded a forum of 300 scientists which work together to find solutions for removing carbon dioxide, which is the most important greenhouse gas from human emissions, which is the cause for climate change, how to remove it from the atmosphere using nature, using natural solutions. Apart from my work in the lab, I also, I think 3 years ago, kind of understood that the situation is we're living in an emergency time. And I always say that if the public and the media and the government and all people will see what we scientists see in our labs, read in our articles, or hear in our conferences, I think people will go out, leave everything that they're doing, and will start to work towards solving, I think, the biggest crisis humanity has ever faced, which is kind of ignored in most places. And I think we're now at a crossroads where we need to decide if we're gonna fight it radically and immediately, or we're gonna keep ignoring it and then face the consequences. And I think that Fiona will tell us later, and now she showed us how it feels when just the tip of the iceberg is shown. It's gonna be much worse, unfortunately. So I talk a lot to the public in Israel and to the media in Israel and to the government officials and Knesset members about climate change. We gather more than 100 scientists to a forum of scientists that will talk to the public, because in many surveys that we are doing in Israel, and I've seen similar surveys in the US as well, and in Europe, the public listens and to scientists about climate change more than social media, more than government officials, more than other and friends and family. So scientists are the most important source of information, and scientists should be in front, I think, everywhere they can. It occurs a lot in the US, by the way. There are many scientists that are going out to the media and leading the climate movement. But in Israel, it's just something that we're just starting today, and Ben Gurion is one of the leaders in this pathway. And I'm very happy to talk with Fiona about a lot of stuff that we can gonna discuss in a minute. Thank you.
Thank you, Avner. Now I turn it over to Rabbi Zelazo and Dr. Gross just to engage in conversation about this really important topic.
Mm-hmm. You know, this topic of climate change and the disaster that I see are pretty scary. And I want to ask you, Avner, based on your research, what do you think are the long-term prediction for health of human marine life, animals, about the health issues, and where are we going with that?
Great question. I think that we'll start, let's go back to the past about 10,000 years ago, when the climate of our planet shifted towards a sweet spot, great equilibrium for the temperatures and concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and moisture and amounts of rainfall were shifted toward the sweet equilibrium, where we can actually flourish and build our wonderful society. We could make agriculture. We have much more places to live in. Before we've been in a ice age. Okay, we couldn't live in the US, we couldn't live in Europe, and then we have much more places we can live. We can grow plants, which we couldn't grow before because the plants couldn't do photosynthesis because we didn't have enough carbon dioxide. The temperature is exactly what we need to grow wheat, to grow rice. Okay, and this is why people shifted from being we had 10,000 years ago about 10 million people in the world. Now we have 9 billion people on Earth, because we can flourish, because we have everything we need, because of the sweet spot of equilibrium, of climate equilibrium, which we call it the Holocene. This is the geological era that we live in now. And this helped us to do this agricultural revolution, and then industrial revolution, and then technological revolution, and then AI revolution, and become this magnificent society that we live in. But about 100 years ago, I think, and getting much worse in the past 30, 40, 50 years, last 50 years, we're changing nature, we're changing Earth's climate, which is something that before we've seen only great forces such as volcanoes and solar and the sun are doing. Now humanity, a single species, changing the climate of an entire planet. It's something we haven't seen before, and it's kind with making ourselves God. Okay, so we're shifting the climate towards we're taking it out of equilibrium, and when we're taking it out of this equilibrium that help us flourish, so things are deteriorating, and we've seen these differences in we've seen this huge extreme weather events that we haven't seen before, and we've seen flood and extreme rainfall, as we've seen in Spain in this October, and we've seen in North Carolina and Florida just 2 months ago, I think. And we've seen droughts that are affecting all places all over the world, and extreme heat, fires, as we've seen in Canada last summer. That's something that we haven't seen before, or before it happened once in a millennia, or once in 500 years. Now we've seen it once in a decade, or once in 2, 3, 5 years. But our society, our governments, our communities, our economy, and our infrastructure was built to a different climate. Okay, so we're not built to live in this new climate era, or this human climate, or this climate era that we entering into, and we need to consider how we're going to solve this problem, and because it's going to get much worse if we're not going to bring it back to the way it was 50, 60 years ago. Technologically or scientifically, we can do it, but politically or economically, we still are not willing to do it. So we have a lot of work to do to convince the public that this is the time to make these changes. And unfortunately, I think that things are getting grimmer and grimmer, and we've seen the last year was the hottest year on record, and 2024 broke this record, and now we have 2 years which are the hottest on record. So yeah, we have a lot of work ahead of us if we want to make Earth habitable for the next 50, 60, 100 years for our children and for ourselves.
Thank you.
Yeah. So maybe I can ask you a question, Siona, based on what you asked. Yeah. So I was talking about the increase in disasters okay, extreme weather events such as floods and heavy rainfall that we're going to see much more, going to be much more common.
תדבר יותר לאט.
Okay, sorry. So I was talking about how extreme weather events like flood and extreme rainfall are going to be much more common in this new era that we're entering in. So I was wondering, as someone who has been working in disaster areas, as a disaster spiritual care provider for the American Red Cross, as you said, so maybe can you share with us, how does it look like from your eyes? What did you witness? What does it look like in a community that is hit by disaster? So I think it in my lab, but I never spent time a place that was hit by a flood or by a huge drought or extreme rainfall. So if you can share with us your...
You know what, I see the results of the disaster is it's like I'm standing there and I don't believe what I see. Because when you look at the horizon and you see the tornado is erasing a whole area, just erasing a whole area, nothing is left, everything to the ground. The people are in such a trauma that all they want to talk is about what happened when they were there and how they were saved. But they worry, where am I going to go sleep tomorrow? I don't have a place to go. What am I going to eat tomorrow? I don't have insurance. I don't have a house. And everything that you can imagine of misery by losing everything makes you think that this disaster is much more than just the house that's gone. Like people share, when I ask them, what would you say the most important thing that you lost? And a lot of people say, I lost all the family albums. I have no more memory. Everything is gone. It's erased because she doesn't have it on her phone, right? And the other thing that I see is actually another issue that came up to me. And what I see is a social problem. What do I mean by social problem? Is by seeing the inequality in our society. Who is most affected by the floods and the tornadoes? The poor people. Who are most affected by the disaster is those who don't have money to pay insurance, and they go to live in places that are flood dangerous places. And those are the people who live in a trailer. They don't even have a home. And these are people who have the little they had was gone. And I'm also asking myself, if disaster affects the lower level of our society, what does it mean of the American society? How well are we, why are we allowing people to suffer more because of their economic, education, health? The people in Kentucky, I would say 90% have no teeth. That's health. They're not healthy because they don't have health insurance. And so for me, it's another level of a disaster that we need to think about when we are trying to correct behavior of people. And those poor people are not going to care again about climate change because they need to worry about putting food on the table. That's a problem. That's what I see.
I remember now that in Israel, just I'm linking something to what you said. There was a huge heat wave in May 2022 or 2020, 2023, I think. So we had no capacity for electricity, so the government needed to decide Who's gonna do? So they need to take the shelter down. Okay, they need to do an outage of power, but they need to decide where do we close this electricity, the air conditions, to the poor Bedouins that live in the Negev, or to Bnei Brak, or to Tel Aviv, or to the kibbutzes in other places. So there was no debate about it, but they just decided which places. So of course they decided that the weakest communities will won't have access to electricity, and the richest communities will have as much access as they want. So I think it's something that we're gonna see much more. And as I said before, I think that what you're saying is that our political and social structures are not fit to deal with this kind of disasters that's gonna increase the inequality even more than what we've seen today. So it's something that is really, really problematic, and we need to think how we're gonna respond to that. And as you say, people that are hurt by this disaster doesn't care about climate change because they just lost their house. So the question is, who should care? I mean, what can we do to
Yeah, this is what I will ask you the same question, is like, what can be done? First of all, we need to change the mindset of people. So for you to talk about climate change is not only a pragmatic thing, it's a theoretical thing too. Education to change or teach people to understand what's going on. Then there is a lot of work to be done. You know, I was thinking when I just came back from Asheville, Hurricane Helene, and as you know, the water there was contaminated. So people didn't have water. They couldn't have water to drink. They didn't have water to shower. And those who had water in their faucet, the water was yellow. Okay, so what's the solution? The solution is to provide water bottles. So you wash your teeth, you shower, you wash your hands with water bottles, okay? And I got scared to see the piles of plastic water bottles that were sitting on the side of every road. And I was thinking, do they have a choice? They don't have a choice. They need a water. But what are we doing? We are furthering damaging the environment. What could have been done by then? You know, the American Red Cross provided special, they had some kind of big containers of clean water. They purified it, and they brought, they put showers, laundries, and dryers for people to come and take a decent shower. But it was such a problem in all Asheville that the Red Cross couldn't even handle that, you know.
I think we're choosing the easy way. This is the easy way. We're not.
So I'm asking you, what in your mind could be a different way? It's an easy way, but is there another way?
So I think we should start at the beginning of, I mean, if the disaster happens, we need to do whatever we need to do now to help these communities. And if we need plastic buckets because we're not prepared with other sources of water or other shelters, so this is what we'll do. But we need to understand that this is a threat. It's gonna happen again and again.
Yeah.
So we have to be prepared, like we prepare for wars, like we prepare for so car accident and other health issues, like we were prepared for COVID. Okay, the problem is climate change is a very hard story to understand in people's minds. There was no climate change before, so we cannot relate to it. Sorry. We've had different illnesses before, so we knew maybe COVID was something new, but we knew what is a epidemic. Okay, we knew what we should do. Maybe we didn't do it best, but our people understood that there is a crisis. But climate change is it's transparent. We cannot see it in our eyes. We cannot smell it. What is it? We haven't seen climate change in the past. Maybe only the flood of Noah, as you said before. So we know from geological studies that the flood was actually happened because we moved out from the ice age and the ice caps and the glaciers melted and the Mediterranean went up because there was much more water in the Mediterranean, and they flew inside the Black Sea and filled the Black Sea and actually made the flood. So it's something that this is actually the first climate disaster in our modern era, I would say. And by the way, there is, as far as I know, a story, a myth of flood in many, many religions, not only for the Jews, during the same era, when Earth shifted away from the ice age toward the warmer era, is what I said, about 8,000, 10,000 years ago, and flooded happened, or increase in sea level rise happened across the globe, and many, many societies called it a flood, but it actually was climate change. So the question is how religions which were designed, I mean, you know better than me, but were designed or invented 5,000-6,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, in a different climate, okay? How our religious minds, our spiritual minds, they need to shift because now we're in a new climate era. So how religion will respond to these massive changes that we have as humans and the entire planet, that they give us the answer to this crisis where humans, maybe they started as master of the planet, but now they are destroying the planet, which is immoral, I guess. And can we be the guardian of the planet? How can we do it? I mean, I think religion, if it's Judaism or Christianity or Islam, doesn't matter which religion, but we're Jews, so let's talk about Judaism. What should we do? Maybe it happens in the US more than in Israel, because in Israel, almost no rabbi, no religious leaders talks about climate change, about nature, about the environment. I mean, almost it's neglected almost completely. So how can we make religion help us to fight this crisis, solve this crisis? I think we have to find our spiritual way to if we want to win this huge fight of humanity. So if you have any thoughts about, or maybe people from the audience.
It's interesting that you brought up the idea of religion, and let's focus on Judaism. It's like, we all know that Judaism is not a monolithic religion, and we have different parts of movements that have different beliefs what God means to them. So if Reform Judaism sees God in nature, for example, then it's easier way to manipulate the thinking and to be more pragmatic about climate change and maybe social action. But if you're talking about part of the Orthodox, the traditional religion that thinks that God is responsible for everything, then how can you argue with God? It's like, in the Talmud, there is, we say that if we witness an earthquake or a natural disaster, we actually have to say a blessing. Blessed be he who strength and power fill the world, meaning that I'm just a little part here, this was God's will. And so can you negotiate a change of philosophy or theology with people who believe that God is everything? But Maimonides said, God is not responsible for everything. God gave us free will. And with the free will, we are responsible to do more good and understand God is there, but we can do a little bit better than what we do now. So, but I can tell you that much, that when I am meeting religious people, and when they share their faith, how strong their faith is, saying like, oh, I was saved from that tornado, but God will provide. I believe God will provide, and I believe there must be a reason God did that. And people, instead of living in fear and awe, they believe in acceptance. And for these people, healing and recovery is much easier than those who feel, for example, this must have been a punishment of what I did, or maybe the people around me did. And I said, what kind of sin are you talking about? They wouldn't even tell you what kind of sin. They just said it's a punishment, period. No discussion, So I think that bringing religion to the picture is going to be a challenge. But the way to come around is to find Jewish people who are more open-minded to think, I am a partner with God, and I need to help God to fix this. And it's again, it's a theology. It could be a personal theology or a movement theology. And it's like to have people understand. In Asheville, I talked to a person an artist who is a pagan. And we talked about climate change because he was very intelligent. And he says, Mother Earth is crying. And I said, what is she crying for? And he said, because we are doing everything to hurt her. The way we eat, the way we throw stuff, the way we treat our environment with no respect. And then we had a wonderful conversation, a theological conversation, but he understands climate change. But right now he said, Tsiona, they're taking me out of the shelter and I don't know where I'm going to go tomorrow. The bottom line. Did I answer your question?
I think so. I mean, I think that maybe, yeah, I think that the people that are being hurt by a disaster, maybe it's much harder for them to see the relation to religion. But maybe, as you said, there are many, many movements in Judaism. So I think movements that will understand that they need to look at what we're doing to nature. As you said, Mother Nature is crying. I think that will have much more impact on our society, on Jewish people, on the world, in the era that we live in now. Just I will give a few examples. Since the 1970s, we have average decrease of 70% in the number of wildlife species that live on Earth. 70% went down. We actually killed them. We killed, maybe we polluted the oceans or the rivers, or maybe we cut down forests, doesn't matter. But we 70% decrease. In the Amazon forest, for example, this is just for a document, just from a document that came out 2 months ago. In the Amazon forest, we're talking about 94% decrease in populations of wildlife. It was only 64% a few years ago, so 30% more. So Mother Earth is crying. Okay, we are changing the climate of an entire planet. We actually kind of playing God. So I'm asking myself whether we can interpret somehow, or I mean, I'm sure there are some rabbis and religious leaders that are doing it, but whether this can be a mainstream in Judaism, at least let's say in the reforms in the US, maybe not in the Orthodox in Israel, in the US, but do you think it's something that we're gonna see, changes that we're gonna see, or something that we're gonna talk about much more? Because I think religion can lead this fight against climate change. It shouldn't be only a secular fight, only a scientific fight, only
Right.
this. Um,
Mm. We have some comments on the Q&A, I see.
yeah,
Should we read them, Matthew, or should
If
we?
each of you want to pick one or two of the comments that you each want to respond to, feel free.
The
so
first
Yona, you
comment
can
is
start.
actually,
Yeah.
well, the first comment is from my husband, believe it or not. Dr. Gross, you stated that the most important issue for global warming is man-made sources of carbon dioxide. Please comment on how important the impact of methane generated as a result of man's reliance on domestication of animals, such as cows, steer, which I understand increases greatly methane in the atmosphere.
Yeah, thank you. Good question. So methane is a huge problem. About 30% of the warming potential that we've seen in our atmosphere comes from methane, actually, and not from carbon dioxide. We usually talk on carbon dioxide because it's the most famous one, but methane that comes mainly from our domesticated animals. So it's a huge problem. We've seen it increasing exponentially in the last few years. I mean, much more than all our models have thought. So it's a huge problem. We have a few ideas how we can. I mean, the only solution is to reduce the emissions of methane. So it's a behavioral question more than a technological or a scientific question. Because if we want to eat a lot of meat, we'll have much more methane emissions. And once we have more methane, we have more warming. There is a feedback, kind of a feedback, a positive feedback. When we have more methane, we have more warming, then we have more um, um, heating in the in the poles and in the forest, and then we see more methane leaks from the icy soil that was buried there for many, many years. Then we have more warming, and then so we should stop methane emissions as soon as we can. And maybe it's easier than carbon dioxide because, as we said, methane comes mainly from agriculture, but also from irresponsibilities of the coal mining and oil mining. A lot of methane actually escaping from the soils or from the ocean once we drill for oil or for gas or for coal, maybe 15%, 20% of the methane that we emit. So this is something we can, with regulation, we can easily stop, but still politically, we're still not there, but it's something we can, that is being discussed in all the conferences everywhere. So I hope it's gonna change soon. Yeah, so methane is a problem, yeah.
Thank you. So I'm reading the question, Matthew, right? I'm going to read a question from Beth Rosen. I work in a conservative religious school. What should we teach our kids about this?
So this is for you, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, we can both answer. I will answer like children are a perfect ground to start brainwashing them, if you if you will, of about respect to the environment and even teaching a child not to kill an ant or a bee because they are part of creation, just to even to teach children of to eat better. You know, you should feed them better and try to teach them how the environment works, to let them understand what CO2 is and what happens in their home. That's my thought.
I totally agree, and I think to connect them emotionally or spiritually to the fact that our earth is God's creation and we cannot hurt it as we do. I mean, it's immoral, it's spiritual, it's not religious. So I think it's something we should talk about everywhere that we can and teach our kids as soon as possible once they're little. Yeah, I think this is the way.
I can't even imagine like having worksheets for children about the ecosystem. Like teach them what is ecosystem and how the chain works in our ecology, so they understand how one step can affect the other, like a domino effect or something. Like if you're creative, you can create some work thing. Okay.
So maybe I can
So again,
look for another question.
yeah.
So let's see from David Bockman. Didn't blue-green algae totally make over the climate of the Earth? How is human effect on climate change different than that? Where is the positive and negative effects? Well, there are positives and negative effects then, and is there possibility for both negative and positive outcome from the anthropogenic effect on climate? Okay.
For you.
So this is a good question. So I think that when climate changes, everybody suffers. It's not the first time that climate has changed on Earth. It happened many, many times. But every time it happens, it changed evolution, it changed biology, and the species that lived during these periods suffered a lot. Some of them were extinct, some of them survived, but suffered a lot in decrease in their populations. So I think if you look at the long term, there may be a few places that climate change gonna have a positive outcome. Maybe in Siberia, maybe in northern parts of Canada and Alaska, we can grow agriculture in Canada, okay, much more than we can do today, because the growing season is gonna be not short as now. The weather gonna be warmer, so maybe we'll see some positive outcome there. But most of the people in humanity now, most of our people on Earth lives in places that's gonna suffer much more. And in Brazil and India and China and Southeast Asia and Africa, of course, in the Middle East, many models suggest that they're gonna be unlivable, uninhabitable in the next 40, 50 years. At least billion people couldn't live in India in 1960, 1970. So where they all will go? They will need to go. There's gonna be a massive shift of populations, and we see what happened when 1 million people from Syria came to Europe and how it shifted the entire political structure of Europe and what happens now everywhere. And we've seen what happens in the immigration from Venezuela and Mexico and Central America to the US and how it affects political structure in the US. So now try to imagine what will happen when there are going to be billions of people that will need to move away from these places, which will be very, very hard to live in. What is going to happen and what kind of waves it's going to make on life of Western countries that maybe will suffer less. So I think maybe something to finish with climate change, I think it's not scientific or natural problem. I'm much less afraid from heat waves and floods, which gonna I mean, if people are gonna get hurt from that in specific communities, it's very, very bad. But I think the most hurting condition that's gonna happen with climate change is how human will react. And human will react badly, I think, and democracy will collapse once we see this massive and huge movement of people. It's going to ignite wars and a lot of changes in politics, in geopolitics, and in our societies and economies. So it's something we should keep in mind.
So we're almost out of time, but in just the last minute or two, if each of you want to offer us one last thought, hopefully something positive that we can sort of take away from the conversation today.
Avner, you go first.
Okay. So I think that climate change give us an opportunity that no generation had before us. Because in our modern society, let's say, we never had shift in climate, in our natural conditions, because climate change decides where we'll have forest and where we'll have ocean, and how many people are going to live on Earth, and how much food we will have, and how many people will live, and how many people will die, okay? And now the climate is changing, so I think we have the opportunity for the first time to change ourselves, to change humanity towards a better place, and to become the guardian of the planet. And to become guardian of the planet, we have artificial intelligence and scientific solutions that we can use, but we can't do it without the spiritual feeling that we are part of this creation of this earth. And I think this is the message that maybe Tsiona and I have talked about when we prepared our meeting. And this is the message that I'm starting to perceive myself and try to think about how to give it, how to put it in words. So it's a mission that I have.
Yeah, good. The way I want to put a positive twist on all of that is, first of all, that what I say, the resilience of humanity, people are resilient and they have ways to recover. So I would want to see a change of mind, and I'm taking upon myself to read more and teach more and make other people bring it to my camp and saying, let's find a meaning of all of it. What is the meaning in climate change? And maybe through understanding the meaning, we can go and pave a way to the consciousness of our colleagues, of our children, and I pray that the world for my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren will be a beautiful place to be, that they're going to have to continuing with the social justice and awareness of how to make life beautiful, because the world is beautiful. And I look around and I love creation and I love all nature around me, and I want to pamper it. And I will put it, my dream and my vision with everyone I know.
Well, thank you so much to our presenters, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. Our final webinar in the series will be this coming Monday on the topic of food production in our planet, which we hinted at a little bit today, and we'll be talking about much more in depth next week. So thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to hopefully joining us again next week. Have a good rest of your day or a good evening. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
For everybody. Thank you, Avner, for being my partner in this. It was a pleasure. And thank you, Matthew, for being behind the scene. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I really enjoyed the discussion at Fiona, and thank you, Matthew, for inviting me. Yeah, and hope to see you soon, everybody.
Yeah, I'll visit you in Israel, I promise.
Yeah, perfect. Let me know when I'm there.